The grand hall of the Galactic Council trembled with the hum of anticipation. The high-ranking members of the most powerful galactic institution had gathered in a rare moment of unity, each species representative seated in their assigned circles. At the center, a human diplomat stood alone. His name was Marcus Callahan, and though few knew his true identity, all had heard of humanity's rapid rise in the galaxy. Callahan's presence was enough to make several council members uneasy, though none dared show it outwardly. With his dark hair neatly combed and his gray eyes fixated on the holographic display of the galactic map, he gave off an air of detached calm. A soft murmur filled the air as he waited for the meeting to begin, his thoughts far from the ornate chamber. Diplomat Callahan, a voice from the Xerac delegate echoed, cutting through the quiet murmur. We've discussed your race's recent progress at length. The Council is concerned about your people's growing influence. Callahan shifted his weight, raising a brow but saying nothing. His reputation preceded him. He had built humanity's alliances, made peace with former enemies, and brokered deals that the Council had thought impossible. Yet the Xerac's words were charged with suspicion, veiled threat hanging in the air. "We understand your concern," Callahan replied, his voice cool, measured, "but humanity's progress is not a threat. We only seek to collaborate." "That's what you say," the Xerac growled, "but your abilities are not easily ignored. Your diplomats come from a species that survived hostile environments and impossible odds. Your survival instincts are unparalleled." "What do you seek, Callahan?" "Dominion." There it was. The underlying fear. Not just of humanity's growth, but of their resilience. Callahan remained silent, his face a mask of diplomacy, though his mind reeled. The Xerac's words were not those of a concerned diplomat, but a predator's warning. Humanity was a species that had survived everything the universe had thrown at them, and for the first time, it seemed the Council was beginning to see that survival as a threat. "The Council has always prided itself on fostering cooperation," Callahan said, his voice laced with a subtlest edge, "not division. We seek peace. Perhaps that makes you uneasy." A sharp laugh echoed from the HFY delegate, their elongated forms swaying slightly as they adjusted their position. Peace? Or dominance under the guise of cooperation? Before Callahan could respond, the chamber's doors swung open with an ominous groan. Two armored guards stepped forward, flanking a new figure. Callahan's senses went on high alert. A surprise visitor? There was something wrong about this, an undercurrent of tension in the air. The guards made no attempt to speak, and their postures seemed threatening. Callahan's diplomatic instincts flared. Something was about to happen. His hand moved slowly beneath the table, fingers brushing the hidden earpiece that could signal his guards. "Is this necessary?" Callahan finally asked, his voice ice-cold now, addressing the leader of the Galactic Council directly. "What's the meaning of this interruption?" The high-ranking official stood, a figure draped in the ceremonial garb of authority. The alien's thin, angular face remained unreadable, but his words were sharp. "We've been given information. Human diplomats are far more dangerous than previously believed. It seems our concerns were justified." The words rang out like a verdict, and before Callahan could process the implications, the unexpected happened. The doors slammed shut behind the guards, locking the room in a tense, airtight silence. The diplomat's pulse quickened. "Are you planning to arrest me?" Callahan asked with growing suspicion, but the voice in his ear confirmed his fears. His personal guards were nowhere to be seen. "You're not under arrest," the council leader said, his voice cold as ice. "You're an immediate threat. Humanity's rise must be controlled." Callahan's mind raced. This was no simple diplomatic meeting. The council was planning something, and whatever it wasn't peaceful. The lights dimmed in the chamber, casting long shadows over the faces of the delegates. A hidden menace began to stir. Suddenly, without warning, blaster fire erupted from the corners of the room. It was an ambush. Callahan reacted in an instant. A blur of motion, faster than any council member could follow, as his hand shot out to activate a hidden defense mechanism in his wristband. The sound of energy blasts filled the air, But by the time the council members reached for their weapons, Callahan had already disarmed them, his movements a fluid, precise dance of military precision. In the chaos, a cold smile spread across his face. This was his element. When the diplomatic facade had failed, his instincts for survival kicked in. He moved through the room, taking down guards with efficiency that left even the seasoned council members stunned. "What is this?" the Xerac delegate cried, now backing away, eyes wide in disbelief. This is impossible." Callahan's gray eyes never left the delegate, and his voice was a whisper of steel. "You should have asked yourself that before deciding to test humanity's limits." A cold sweat ran down the back of the diplomat's neck. There was no turning back now. Humanity's hidden strength had been revealed, and the council, for the first time, truly understood what they had awakened. The chamber's air was thick with tension, the faint hum of the wall's defense systems the only sound breaking the silence. Callahan stood alone amidst the fallen guards, their energy weapons scattered across the floor. His chest rose and fell in steady breaths, his mind processing the sudden chaos. The blaster fire had stopped, and now it was eerily quiet, too quiet. The Xerac delegate was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with disbelief. You're one of them, aren't you? Not just a diplomat. A soldier." Callahan's eyes flicked toward the Xerac, his gaze cold. "I am exactly what humanity needs me to be," he replied, his voice even. "You should have understood that before the attack." A sharp gasp came from the HFY representative, whose many eyes were wide with a mix of fear and awe. "This wasn't the plan," they whispered, their voice quivering. "This isn't what the council agreed to." The words sent a chill through the room. "What do you mean, not the plans?" Callahan demanded. His fingers twitched, a subtle motion betraying the heightened tension coursing through his veins. This ambush wasn't part of the negotiations. The HFY delegate hesitated, as if deciding whether to speak. His many eyes darted to the other delegates, their faces a mixture of panic and guilt. He took a deep breath, then slowly stood, folding his numerous limbs with calculated precision. "No, it wasn't. This is something far worse." The floor beneath Callahan's boots seemed to hum, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that set his instincts on high alert. "What are you talking about?" His voice was tight, clipped, the weight of his situation pressing against his chest. The HFY delegate spoke again, his voice now grave. "We were warned about your kind. But not just your kind, your history. The council knew about Earth's legacy long before you ever came to our doorstep." He stepped forward, his many eyes locking with Callahan's. "You were never meant to be here. Humanity was supposed to remain in the dark." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, the full weight of their meaning crashing over Callahan. "What are you saying?" he murmured, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of what was happening. The HFY took a step back, clearly shaken. "They've been hiding it from you. The humans, your ancestors, were more than just survivors. They were warriors. The council knew what you were capable of, but your kind was forgotten for a reason." He motioned to the guards, still sprawled on the ground, unconscious but alive. "You were never supposed to rise again." Callahan's heart skipped. The information was a blow, but one he hadn't fully absorbed. "So you're telling me that my people, my ancestors, fought in this galaxy long before we even knew about it?" He shook his head.
"Why?
What happened to them?" The delegate's voice dropped to a whisper, as if confessing a truth too dark for the others to hear. "The war that ended your ancestors? It wasn't just a war. It was a massacre. And the surviving species, those who still sit on this council, they made sure humanity was erased from the records. Forgotten." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Until you came." A bitter laugh escaped Callahan's lips. "That's what this is all about? Fear? A lie about who we were?" He paced, trying to process the revelation. How could they hide something so big? He cut himself off, clenching his fists. It felt like a part of him was being unraveled, pieces of his identity coming undone. And now, the Xerac's voice was low, filled with dark amusement. "Now the council is terrified you'll remember who you really are." Callahan's mind reeled, but something deeper within him stirred. Humanity's strength, their resilience, their survival, it wasn't a simple matter of luck. There was more to them, to him, than just diplomacy. He had been trained for something beyond politics. Something deep in his blood, something ingrained in his very being, was coming to the surface. "I think it's time we reminded them," Callahan said slowly, his voice hardening. His body, which had remained still and controlled moments ago, now seemed to hum with an unspoken power. "What happens when you don't underestimate humanity?" The HFYX looked horrified. "Don't be a fool. You don't understand what you're up against. These aren't just petty politicians. These are the architects of a galaxy's fate." Callahan turned his gaze to the figure at the head of the room, the council leader. "Then it's time to show them what happens when they underestimate the forgotten Titan." His words were like a spark, igniting a fire. The realization hit him. Humanity's true legacy had been buried, but now, he was the one who would awaken it. He wasn't just a diplomat. He wasn't just a survivor. He was the harbinger of something far more dangerous. The council had made a grave mistake in thinking humanity could be forgotten. And Callahan would make sure they paid for that mistake. With a determined glint in his eye, Callahan turned toward the chamber's exit. The path ahead was clear. War was coming, but he would be the one to lead humanity back into the fold. The galaxy would remember them, not as a footnote, but as the force that could never be erased again. And no one, not even the mighty council, could stop it. The air in the council's war room crackled with tension as Callahan strode toward the head of the table. The holographic map before him flickered, displaying the myriad of galactic sectors, each marked with potential threats. His hands clenched at his sides, not from fear, but from a deep, simmering anger. He could feel it rising, the memory of what humanity had once been, and the knowledge that it had been buried for far too long. The council delegates were seated around the table, their faces a mix of concern and quiet calculation. But there was one thing they couldn't hide: fear. It lingered in their eyes as they avoided his gaze, shifting uneasily in their seats. Callahan was no longer the unassuming diplomat they had once underestimated. He was a reminder that humanity was not something to be disregarded. "You've made a mistake," Callahan said, his voice steady, but the weight of his words reverberated across the room. "This war is inevitable. You've forced my hand." The Zirac delegate, a creature with slick, black scales that shimmered under the artificial light, scoffed. "You think you're capable of, what, leading a galaxy-wide campaign? Your species is nothing but children with weapons. You've already shown us that." "And that's where you're wrong," Callahan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've seen us as weak, as primitive. But you've forgotten one thing. We fight for survival. And when humanity fights, we don't stop until the war is over. And we win." A flicker of doubt crossed the Zirac's face, but it was quickly masked by a sneer. "You'll fail. Your people aren't prepared for what the council can do." "That's where you're mistaken again," Callahan said, his hand slowly tracing the holographic map, his fingers brushing over the symbols of human colonies spread across the galaxy. "We've been preparing for this moment for decades. It's not just about the weapons we've developed. It's about our unity, our will." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He could see it now, the dawning realization. The council had underestimated humanity for too long. They had believed their control over the galaxy was absolute, but Callahan knew the truth. The humans who had been scattered across the stars had been growing stronger, silently, in the shadows. "We may be a small part of your grand design," Callahan continued, his voice cold but resolute. "But we will not be ignored any longer." One of the delegates, a tall, elegant being with translucent skin, leaned forward. "You're making a mistake, human. We control the galaxy. We've orchestrated every moment of this galaxy's history. You're not as important as you think you are." Callahan met the delegate's gaze with unwavering resolve. "Maybe not. But we will be the ones to remind you of who you've forgotten." The words lingered, and an almost imperceptible ripple of unease passed through the room. The other delegates exchanged glances, their masks of indifference cracking, revealing the first signs of fear. They had misjudged Callahan and, by extension, humanity. Now, it was too late to turn back. From the back of the room, the HFY delegate finally spoke, his voice heavy with a warning. You don't understand the consequences of defying the Council. We have technology that your species couldn't even fathom. Our reach extends across the stars. You think you can challenge that? Callahan turned, his back straightening as he faced the HFY. We have something more powerful than your weapons. We have the will to fight. And we have the strength to back it up. The room's temperature seemed to drop as the HFY's many eyes narrowed. Your arrogance will be your undoing. Callahan shook his head, his eyes glinting with cold determination. It's not arrogance. It's knowledge. The knowledge that we've been underestimated. But that's about to change. The galaxy will learn just how wrong they were. The silence was deafening as the delegates exchanged nervous glances. The tension was palpable, crackling in the air like an electric storm. Callahan's words had cut through their pretenses, stripping away the facade of control they had so carefully built. He turned away from them, walking toward the door, his final words leaving a lingering impact in the room. Prepare yourselves. Humanity is coming. And this time, we won't just be part of your galaxy. We will take our place at the center of it. As Callahan stepped into the hall, the hum of the war room's doors closing behind him, he allowed himself a breath. The weight of his resolve settled into his bones. It was no longer about diplomacy, about negotiating peace. The time for talk had ended. Now, the galaxy would see the true power of humanity, the forgotten Titan, unleashed. Outside the war room, the first of the human ships had entered orbit above the Council's capital. And Callahan knew that their arrival marked the beginning of the end for the Council's reign. The galaxy had been warned. Now it would feel the full force of humanity's fury. Callahan stood before the viewport of the human command ship, his eyes fixed on the distant, glowing expanse of the Galactic Council's capital. The stars beyond twinkled coldly, indifferent to the conflict unfolding. Behind him, the soft hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing in his mind. The last few hours had been a blur of preparations, meetings, and terse conversations with his officers. Now, everything rested on the edge of a blade. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. "Captain," came a voice behind him, sharp and confident. It was Lynn, his second-in-command. The woman's dark eyes were unwavering as she stepped forward, a digital tablet in her hands. "The fleet is ready for the first phase. The Council is beginning to mobilize their defenses, but they don't expect us to be here this soon." Callahan turned, his gaze steady. "They never do." Lynn's lips twisted into a grim smile. "They're going to regret underestimating us." He nodded, turning back to the viewport. The thought of humanity, of Earth, filling his mind. The galaxy had always thought them weak, naive even. But they had only seen the surface, the part humanity had allowed them to see. They never realized what lay beneath. "I've sent word to the fleet commanders," Lynn continued, her voice cool. "The first wave will arrive in 10 minutes. We're targeting their outer defenses. We'll create a breach and secure a landing point. Once we do, we move fast. We can't give them time to react." "Good," Callahan said, his voice low but purposeful. "Once we breach, we push through. No hesitation. No mercy." Lynn paused, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "Are you sure about this? We could still try to negotiate. We don't have to go full-scale war." Callahan exhaled, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of the command console. "It's too late for negotiations. They've made their choice. Now we make ours." Lynn nodded, though there was a hint of reluctance in her gaze. She respected Callahan's decision, but she didn't share his certainty. She was more cautious, always calculating the risks. But Callahan had no time for hesitation. The first shot had been fired the moment the Council had decided to wage war. Humanity had given them every chance to see reason. And now, every ship, every soldier, was ready for what was to come. "Ready the first wave," Callahan ordered, his voice a hard edge that brooked no argument. Lynn turned to carry out his command, but before she left, she hesitated. Callahan, just be careful. We've never done anything like this before. He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. That's why we'll succeed. The Council may have technology and resources, but they lack something fundamental. They don't know what it means to fight for everything. They don't know what it means to be human. With that, she left, her footsteps fading as she moved to coordinate the attack. Callahan's gaze drifted to the stars again. His mind raced with images of his family, of Earth. They were counting on him. Humanity was counting on him. The hum of the ship's engines grew louder as the fleet moved into position. Callahan's hand tightened around the edge of the viewport, his knuckles white. The Council had forced their hand, but now it was their turn to face the storm humanity had been hiding for centuries. Minutes later, the command deck was alive with activity. Officers shouted orders, coordinates flashed across the holoscreens, and the crew's focused intensity was palpable. Callahan's eyes were sharp as he scanned the incoming data. Everything was falling into place. "We're in position," Lynn's voice crackled through the comms. "Ready to initiate Phase 1. "Do it," Callahan said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of determination. As Lynn activated the sequence, the entire ship shuddered. A deep, resounding boom echoed through the hull, followed by the sharp hum of energy weapons charging. The first wave was underway. The battle for the future of the galaxy had begun. On the Council's capital, alarms blared as their outer defenses were breached. A flurry of activity spread across the command center as delegates scrambled to assess the threat. They had expected some sort of retaliation, but nothing on this scale. Their forces were scattered, too thin to repel the onslaught. "We've been infiltrated," the Zirac delegate hissed, his many eyes flicking to the holographic display in front of him. "They're inside our perimeter. The humans." "We know," the Council leader cut him off. His voice was measured, though the tension was clear in his posture. "Prepare the reinforcements. We will not let them take the capital." But even as he said it, doubt lingered in the air. The unexpectedness of the human assault was rattling, and the Council, for the first time in centuries, began to understand the true nature of their adversary. Back on the human ship, Callahan's voice rang out, commanding and unwavering. "Keep the pressure on. We move forward, no matter what." The battle had only just begun, but Callahan could already sense the tide turning. This was humanity's moment, an unstoppable force, forged by centuries of survival. The Council had forgotten the most important lesson: never underestimate the will of humanity. And as the fleet advanced, pushing deeper into Council space, Callahan allowed himself a single, grim smile. The storm had come, and the galaxy would never be the same again.